Welcome to the Parts Girl Podcast, powered by PartsEdge. We are excited to present our Fixed Operations Summer Camp Series. Your host, Kaylee Filio, will be joined by industry experts to discuss parts inventory control, special orders, lost sales, manufacturer programs, customer retention, and technicians. You're going to get it all in this special series.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Parts Girl Podcast. I have Mr. Chuck Hartle here with me. Welcome, Chuck. Happy to have you.
Hey.
So for those that don't know, Chuck Hartle is one of the founders of PartsEdge, and I thought I'd have him come on the show because we are doing the summer camp series. So today we're going to focus on talking about inventory control and manufacturer programs. But before we start, Chuck, can you just give a little background on you and, who you are besides the founder of PartsEdge?
Well, been in the auto industry since 1976, so dates me a little bit, but that's okay. I guess for lack of a better term, have always loved the business, had a passion for the parts end of it, and ran the largest Chrysler operation, or one of the largest, year by year change, in the country, down in La Mesa, California. And I started the Mopar Masters Parts Managers Guild, which this was back in 1991. Got together with a couple other parts managers, and we wanted to put together a guild with the largest Chrysler managers in the country and exchange ideas in a non-competitive environment. And it ended up being very successful. They're still going today, even though I haven't been involved with it for quite a while. But then was a fixed ops director, and my last 3 years before I decided to go out and start PartsEdge and do consulting, which was my love and my passion. But I'll tell you, those 3 years as a fixed ops director really helped a lot in understanding how parts and service work together so much. Whereas before I was the wholesale kingdom god, and small g, by the way. And then I finally realized I was chasing 12% dollars instead of 40% dollars. So being a fixed ops director really helped a lot overall, and in the last 23 years since I've been doing this. So there you go.
That's a great story. And I think that when it comes to inventory control, that's really your passion, right? And that's kind of where everything started with PartsEdge, because you, as a parts manager, were finding that you were reacting to controlling the inventory, and you would get with your peers too in the Mopar Guild, and everyone was having the same struggles. So I guess what I want to get from you is, as far as inventory control, I want parts managers who are listening, or dealerships that are listening to this, take something from that and take something away that they can implement. So what would you recommend starting as far as controlling the inventory better or more efficiently for parts managers? Where can they start? I know that's kind of a very broad question.
All the seminars I've done over the years, there was a gentleman, I've told this story a few times, but there's a gentleman by the name of Art Neiman, and you just have to follow where I'm going here. And Art was a human resource expert. And I'll never forget sitting down with him, listening to him at a seminar. And he said, when is the best time to fire an employee? Now you go, what's this got to do with inventory control? Again, bear with me. And his answer was, before you hired them. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. Well, now let's translate that into parts inventory. What's the best way to control your inventory and manage it more effectively? It starts at the point of where you order the part, Kaylee. Making sure what's really ordered is needed. Dealerships have the problem of warranty policies and procedures, doing a lot of business in wholesale. We've used this term I've used it for 30 years, and we call it forced stock. And these are parts that really are unfulfilled demand for several reasons, but one of the main ones we found out when we did a study on this back in 2005, 2006 for a manufacturer was that the number one reason was technicians over ordering parts to solve customer problems. They order the 3 parts and one fixes it, they hand the 2 back to the parts department. Number 2 was returns from wholesale customers, especially body shops. And number 3, which has moved up the ladder, is ASR programs, manufacturer programs, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in a little while. But when you start about that and you think about special order control, that unfulfilled demand, the idle inventory that a dealership has, 95% of the idle inventory comes from unfulfilled demand. It doesn't come from those parts that had an active life that we're selling, and all of a sudden the units in operation have dropped. So it's a whole trickle down effect. Control what's being ordered, control what's being returned. You now control your forced stock, your technical obsolescence, and your obsolescence. So to your point, Kaylee, start and look at your ordering policies and how that's working and control that more effectively. Everything else falls in the line. So 2 words, special orders.
Special orders, yep. And then how do sources play into controlling the inventory more effectively? Because I know when I talk to parts managers, I get both sides. I get some that believe in more sources and then some that are like, I only need 3 sources. So what is your perspective on that sources and how that plays into controlling the inventory?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons for breaking your inventory down granularly, which is something we do, by the way, but there's a lot of reasons for it. It used to be for source by movement, that, okay, the more you sell it, you want to isolate those in the source and give it a different day supply. Let me give you an idea. And this is what used to happen way back when, is if you only got one source and you got all your active part numbers in one source, and even when I was learning, I had this problem, and then I learned how to break it out, by the source. But all of a sudden, I run out of a set of brake pads. And the next thing you know, the technician complains to the service manager. The service manager's in chewing my butt that we ran out of brake pads, for God's sake. So the knee-jerk reaction is to go in to that source where that brake pad is and increase the day's supply. Well, if you got 5,000 part numbers in that one source and you up the day's supply because of that one set of brake pads running out, what did you just do? You increased the day's supply for 5,000 part numbers. That's the obvious explanation to it. But now start to think about, and a lot of people don't think they need sources anymore because they don't do stock orders. Like if you're on RIM or Aero or PartsEdge, a lot of parts managers just go, oh, who cares, about the stock order anymore? The manufacturer's controlling my inventory. But as we found out over and over and over again, there are parts that you're selling that the manufacturer isn't guaranteeing. And so for that aspect, separating out what's guaranteed versus what's not guaranteed, there's a reason for a couple of sources. Now we get into the different commodities for pricing. That's the critical point. Is it menu priced items we want to sell at list? Are they matrix priced items? Is it tires? Is it accessories? Breaking it down by the different commodities makes all the difference in the world. One of the things when we talk about tires and accessories versus maintenance parts or sheet metal is we like to start the phase-in criteria with accessories and tires. We have a phase-in criteria of 2 months demand in 6 months instead of 3 months demand in 9 months. Then we phase them out. Instead of phasing them out at 6 months or 9 months, we start the phase out at 3 months. Because what we found out with accessories and tires is, if you haven't sold it in 3 months, more than likely, the cars are gone or the tires are outdated. So you want to set your phase out criteria completely different than you do for your maintenance items.
Mm-hmm.
Sheet metal. We have some dealers who never want to carry sheet metal. If you isolate sheet metal separately, you can put that at a point where, hey, they're never going to show up in your inventory unless it's forced in. Whereas maintenance items, you want to have those on a very literal phase-in criteria of like 2 and 9, and you want to make sure you got a little more depth to them, whereas sheet metal, you want to buy one, sell one type of scenario. So all of these playing in. Then lastly, and this is important with a lot of dealerships, and we run into this day in and day out, is sales and source accounting, making sure that they're getting accounted right, going to the right sale account, going to the right asset account. Those are a lot of reasons why if you break the inventory down more granularly into more sources, it helps you to effectively control price, not only inventory, but pricing and accounting to make everybody happy. There you go.
Yeah. And you mentioned the matrix and tweaking the matrix a little bit. And I think that gets brought up a lot when we talk to the parts managers we work with is, I guess, what are the biggest issues you run into when a dealership's like, hey, we need to make more gross, just tweak the matrix. How do you overcome that? Because I know it's not as simple as just tweaking the matrix.
Well, in my experience over the last few years, people are tweaking their matrix typically for two reasons. The number one reason is they're tweaking it for warranty uplift to try and get a bigger markup on warranty uplift from the manufacturer. And number two, of course, they're trying to, obsolescence has been growing and they're trying to earn more gross to handle obsolescence because you just can't get enough return allowance for most manufacturers anymore to get rid of it. Well, the problem that we see when you just go after the matrix, we see that the average dealership, only about 25% of their parts really get matrix in customer pay. Now, narrow that down into the focus of your overall parts sales. Your customer pay, and only 25% of that is getting escalated in a matrix. The other 75% is menu price, tires, whatever commodity, fixed pricing, family pricing, whatever you want to call it. That's the larger portion of what your customer pay is to remain competitive. Then you move into internal sales, warranty sales, and wholesale sales. What you got to do, and what we see, is most people build their matrix to where it almost sale proofs captive items. It makes it really hard to sell. They've over matrixed a small fraction of their sales. What you got to do is tweak the matrix a little bit, adjust menu price items up to make a decent profit, go to your internal and maybe add 2% to your internal rate to the sales and used car department or whatnot. Also, lower your discounts by 1% or 2% to mechanical shops and so forth. And of course, then the warranty uplift as well. Passing on that increase to all your different profit centers, not just one small portion of customer pay. That's how you get your gross up.
Makes sense. Sounds easy, but it's not.
Yeah, sounds easy, but it's not. And you get a lot of pushback. And most parts managers, if you're a parts manager listening here, you only get to control, pricing really on wholesale. The rest of it, you're making sure that, you make the service manager happy and that pricing's done. Internally is usually done by the dealer or the general manager and is controlled that way. So, most parts managers, when all of a sudden you say, hey, instead of giving list minus 20 to all the wholesale garages, give them list minus 18, you get pushback because they go, oh, I'll lose all my customers. And, that's not necessarily true with the cost of doing business and what we have to pay now. Even in my business, we have to pay people more. The cost of goods is more. You have to build that profit back in. And that's where just trying to do it on the wholesale side, you say, well, that's my cherry on top. But yet what we see a lot of times, especially in menu and fixed price items, is here lately, there's been a lot of appreciation over the last year and a half, 2 years with the manufacturers, is all of a sudden the cost of an oil filter just went up $1, but you continue to sell them for $8.95, but the cost went up by $1, your profit margin has gone down. And that's why we see some of these gross profit figures dwindling. You need to make sure that moves up.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the depreciation and appreciation because I feel like that gets brought up a lot when we're talking to dealerships. If you're not keeping up with that and booking it, right? Can you go into that a little bit?
Well, yeah, and that's one thing. In fact, I had just today a conversation with a dealer who their inventory had gone up 40,000 since January. Well, as we broke it down and looked at it, more than half of that, 60% of it, had been based on two appreciations, January 1st and July 1st. And, he's going, my inventory's growing, but in reality, his inventory, out of this $40,000 gain, 18,000 of it was special orders and a couple of other things, but 22,000 of it was appreciation. So, the dealer went, gosh, I didn't even think about that. And we've had some instances where they look at their inventory has increased with some of these large $1 million operations. And I've had the conversation with a dealer whose inventory went up 2 million and 1.7 million of it was an appreciation. I said, congratulations. And sometimes with that appreciation, that's another way that you can take some of that money to purge obsolete inventory. Rather than pay the taxes on it, take the appreciation, accrue it, a percentage of it to help you combat obsolescence.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I want to go into auto stock replenishment programs because we touched on it a little bit about forced stock. And I've run into conversations with, people in the industry that have said that, the programs don't create forced stock. And I kind of want to talk about that because I think what we've seen is that they do create forced stock. Even though you can return these parts, we want to talk about that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the stock replenishment programs, and if you happen to be a manufacturer listening to this, you're not going to like to hear some of this, but it's a reality. It's a cost of doing business. But the manufacturer, these ASR programs, once you realize they were designed by and meant to benefit the manufacturer, and they come back and go, oh, by the way, we're going to guarantee this inventory. They've kind of built inflation-proof sales at the manufacturer level. And we've certainly seen this with a couple of manufacturers here. Most recently is all of a sudden the guaranteed amount of inventory, the number of parts that they're suggesting to the dealer has gone up by 20 or 30%. And they have to be at 85 or 90% compliance. So they have to take 9 out of 10 parts that are suggested just to remain compliant and get incentives. And here, the manufacturer goes, ooh, sales are down. Let's tweak our dials a little bit, and let's just get more breadth out into the inventory. And what we measure, we consider what we call forced stock or unfulfilled demand. The way we look at it is really simple. If the year sale is less than 3, if the year sale is 2, 1, or 0 over a 12-month period, it would have never fit a traditional 3 and X phasing criteria, 3 and 9, 3 and 12, whatever. So we know if the year sale is 2 or less, that somehow, some way, that has very marginal sales at this point. And when we look at the ASR programs, we see 30, 40, 45% of the parts that are guaranteed have a year sale of 2 or less. In fact, General Motors parts managers about 12 years ago, they coined the term, and it's so true, they coined the term one-hit wonders. They post a lost sale on a fender, and the next day it'd show up in their demand, and they have to take 9 to 10 of the parts. So, the good news is, and, what everybody tries to point out is, well, who cares? It's guaranteed. Well, if you happen to be a bank manager or whatever, you want to earn interest and things like that, there's a thing in the inventory called holding costs. Mm-hmm. It used to be, and now this calculation is 15 years old, but it made a lot of sense to me. When you look at holding costs on any type of a retail product, there is an expense to putting that part on the shelf. Theoretically, if you want to charge rent space on the shelf, the interest is there. And some propeller heads a lot smarter than me actually calculated out at a 40% gross profit margin. That's cost plus 67. And, but 40% profit margin, if you sell a part at a 40% gross profit margin, and it's been sitting on the shelf 10 months, you basically made 0. Even though it shows 40%, it shows up on the gross profit. Reality is, based on holding costs, that's what it ends up being.
Mhm.
So when you think about that, that's exactly with the manufacturer. If they happen to go out and the manufacturer, they put these parts, and let's take General Motors as an example because they make you hold on to it for 16 months. Now you've got this part, you're bearing the holding cost. The good news is it's guaranteed. The bad news is you got 16 months of some of these marginal parts that are going to, age in. So in essence, some of the manufacturers under these ASR programs have turned dealerships into mini warehouses. In other words, better on the dealer shelf than ours. We'll take it back if it really doesn't sell. And, that's one of the things that we see with ASR programs, whether good, bad, or indifferent, they get to control it, and they're holding you to compliance figures to make you carry some of that inventory.
So what do parts managers do to control their manufacturer programs, so that they don't get a bunch of what we call one-hit wonders, but stay compliant?
Well, no, very good. And this is what we do, because we have a handful of stores, we actually do their compliance with them, and they give us the rules. And if you got to be 85% compliant, be it 86 or 87% compliant. I'm giving you 87% because you don't want to all of a sudden find out you didn't approve a bunch of stuff and all of a sudden you fall down to 83% at month end. But staying just above what the compliance is, if it's 90%, be it 91 or 92%. A lot of times what we see, Kaylee, is when we go in and start working with them, they're 99% compliant. And one of the biggest problems with that is the parts manager doesn't have time to deal with looking at their inventory and they go, well, it's guaranteed, I'll just take it all, and they hit the button. What you want to do is intelligently go in and look at what's my best chance of these, parts that have sold 2 times or 3 times, and accept as few of the one-hit wonders as you can, but making sure that you intelligently look at the list and determine where it is. And like I said, we do compliance for some other dealers, and they give us a playlist. We don't want any sheet metal, and we don't want any powertrain. Other than that, if it, like with General Motors, if it's a service lane part, it's a maintenance item, keep us there. And, it's a game you play. So the best way to play the game is intelligently look at your sales that you're making and stay just above compliance. You got to play the game if you want to get your incentives through the programs that they have. But, nothing, if you can be at 90, 91, why would you ever be at 99 when you could be at 91 or 92?
Oh, that makes sense. To wrap it up, I do want to ask you, if you were looking back at yourself, however many years ago, starting out, what piece of advice would you like to give newer parts managers that are starting out today? Anything that you'd like to tell them?
Know the rules. Know the rules based on your manufacturer. Know them in depth. Mm-hmm. Most parts managers I know of, 99% of them, and I'm saying 99 because I'm sure there's some that are out there. None of us went to college, to become parts managers. We all went through UHK, University of Hard Knocks. But I'll tell you, if you learn the rules that manufacturer, return policies, compliance policies, and whatnot, and put your whole focus, knowing those rules, then start putting your whole focus on really controlling your special orders, making sure customers are contacted and got back. And if you have problem wholesale clients returning a lot of parts, focus in on those customers that are taking advantage of that, but just really focusing on special orders as a whole. Those are the 2 places. If you start at those cores, knowing the manufacturer rules and controlling your special orders, the rest of it starts to fall in line.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And what would you say your favorite thing about parts management is? Like, what's your love about it?
Yeah, that's a trick question. If I would have had my way, I would have been the world's highest paid inventory control clerk. My way of getting stress, if I got stressed out, even once I became the fixed ops director, I can think of a handful of times where I was really frustrated or stressed out, I'd actually disappear in the parts department and I'd go organize a bin and straighten it out and get the bin locations and the boxes pointed out. I was a neat freak, and I would go into the inventory and straighten it out and make it look really pretty. And that was a stress relief for me, Kaylee. So, and hence why I still do what I do for 40 years.
Yeah. So that was your favorite thing. And you said was a neat freak. I think you still are a neat freak.
Well, yes, I am. But, that can be good and that can be bad.
I think it's a good thing.
It's bad if you're trying to focus a lot on sales. If you're stressed out a lot, there you go. But, it can be a good thing because you can't sell what you can't find.
Mm-hmm.
And that was always my point, is organizing the inventory, at least when someone calls and says, do you have this part? A, you can find it, and B, the inventory was accurate. Those were two very important things of that. But again, nothing's more important this day and age than increasing the gross, realizing now that you can't buy yourself out of obsolete problems and inefficient inventory management, that this is really a matter of, and I'll sum it up by saying this, and at one point I sat down with the very high up marketing person with the manufacturer, and I said, why don't you guys make it easier for us to control our inventories and manage it more effectively? And remember, this came from the manufacturer side. He said, why would we ever want to make things easier for the dealer? We make millions of dollars off their inefficiency.
Wow.
So you know what? With that being said, be efficient and don't rely on the manufacturer. They're your business partner. And believe me, I don't hate manufacturers. Are you kidding? They're our lifeblood. But one of the things you have to do, play the game as close as you can. But remember, when the bottom line comes, if they tweak or adjust anything, it just became more expensive to buy that product, whether it's a part because they took away 2% return allowance. To me, they just took away 2% of my gross profit. I need to get it back and pass it on effectively. So there you go.
Well, I think this was a really great episode with a lot of information. So I'm hoping a lot of parts managers and dealers tune in to learn a little bit about what we focus on as far as inventory control. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we end it?
I think I've covered everything, yeah. Kaylee, except thanks for having me. And I'm passionate about inventory control. And part of the reason I wake up every day is every manufacturer is different. There's so many different ways we're all in the same business, but it's amazing how, depending on which manufacturer it potentially is, how completely different it is doing business. But the bottom line is, it really boils down to keep your customers satisfied, carry the right parts to increase your grosses. There you go.
Yep. You're definitely passionate about it. So we will have you back on the show to talk more about the details of this, because I've been getting a lot of requests to get more parts topics. So thank you, Chuck, for joining.
Cool.
Thank you for joining us. PartsEdge, the power tool for your parts department. We hope you're leaving feeling motivated, challenged, and inspired.